Hi, welcome back to Blunt Force Business. I'm Patrick Marino. I am not with Brian LaFauci today. Brian LaFauci has the week off. And today we have a special guest. We got Tyler LaChapelle from DOS M, digital marketing agency. Thanks for joining us, Tyler.
Thanks for having me, Patrick. Excited to be here.
Awesome. So, what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk a little bit about marketing research and doing your work ahead of time to make sure that you're successful. And our blunt force fact of the day is that you have to measure twice and cut once. So, Tyler, why don't you tell me a little bit about what that statement means to you when we say it out loud?
Yeah. So the idea of measure twice and cut once comes from the idea of like construction, where let's say you're building something and you got all these wood pieces. It doesn't make sense to mess things up or shoot yourself in the foot by not taking your time and really making sure that you've measured everything correctly before you start cutting. Like the idea behind this measure twice, cut once is that you're not going to make mistakes and cut your wood the wrong way and mess the whole project up. That's the idea behind that statement. And that's kind of the philosophy behind what I do, or what DOSM is that this agency started as a result of seeing so many business owners get screwed over or making the wrong decisions. So it's just always been in the mindset to prevent that from ever happening. So before we start any sort of major project like a marketing campaign, a drip campaign, system design, website build out, we're always taking the time to do the research ahead to make sure like we're headed down the right path, the right direction. And this is in all aspects. So if we're going to do something marketing related, I start with something called a digital strategy guide. If we're going to do something system or automation related, I do something called an automation audit. So it's really just taking the time to understand my clients, what they need, and what is the data alluding to.
A lot of times, unfortunately, we end up in a situation we have already cut twice or three times, unfortunately. And I think we've all been in that situation. I know I've been in that situation where you kind of put what they call it, put the cart before the horse, and you kind of want to get going. And actually, in our group today, we had at least one perfect person reference just the sheer amount of money that he had poured into marketing.
Yep.
At the beginning, right? And I think that's what happens to a lot of businesses is, okay, I start my business, and then you're like, all right, well, what's next? Oh, well, Google just reached out to me, and they're like, oh, hey, well, why don't you throw some money into a Google ad? Okay, great. And then you start a Facebook page, and you get a notification from Facebook saying, hey, you can boost this post, or hey, start this campaign, or hey, if you
Yep.
put more money into this part of the campaign, you're going to have this much more reach, and whatever it is. And I think that a lot of small businesses, unfortunately, just jump at all that because they're like, hey, I
Exactly.
want to get out. And I think one of the other challenges is that sometimes doing that works because either you get lucky
I was just going to
or
say it's all getting lucky right there.
a
Is you
lot of
just
it is
happen to
getting
get
lucky.
lucky.
A lot of it's getting timing, or a lot of it is
I
sometimes
have something
it,
kind of cruel that I say. Unfortunately, it's just kind of like a trend that I've noticed. And I just say most business owners are shitty business owners that just get lucky. And I'm like, there's some truth to that. It's like I've noticed a lot of business owners have really bad business strategies, or really like from an outside looking in perspective, I'm like, why would you do such things? But they just hit it just right. They got it where they were the right ones to do something. And it's like, okay, if it worked for you. But that's where I think most businesses get successful is like, it's not necessarily like there's probably one or two right moves that they made early on. But then from there, it's just like a lot of moves that just like they got lucky with instead of taking the time to strategically plan this out. It's just maybe that's just because I do a lot of audits. I've seen a lot of people that have like made bad decisions, things like that. But it's an interesting trend. And like I said, it's a little bit cruel, but yeah, I think there's a lot of that where people just kind of get lucky in their decision making.
I think it's a lot of probably for a lot of businesses that kind of plateau or stall out in their growth, right? Or they have a dip, right? Because maybe they have an excellent product, or maybe they hit a market condition at the right time where they were the only player for that
Yep.
particular thing at the time, or maybe they had like this amazing personal network. A lot of people just have like they come out of the gate with this great personal network, and then you get a lot of business at the beginning, but like taking that next step, whether it's moving into a new location or just growing or scaling or new competitors come in, and then you're not prepared for it. And I think that that's probably a lot of what you're seeing when you reach that point. You have these people who were initially successful, And that's part of it
Hmm.
as well, being like a contractor, being an agency coming in. So they have enough money to pay you, which
Yep.
usually means the lights are on and they did some good work at some point, right? They made some money. So
Exactly.
that's kind of the catch 22. But like then now we're dealing with the mistakes. Why don't you, before we move on, why don't you just talk a little bit about your background, because I do think it's a little bit unique, um, and
Yeah.
not just not just kind of what your agency does right now, kind of how you got to where you're at, and then also the unique customers that you work with.
Yeah. So a long story short, I for a Craigslist job that was like a part-time, it was worded like part-time marketing apprentice to turn marketing guru. And it was like something like $8 an hour, specifically part-time. I moved across the country for it. And again, it's just one of those things where I got lucky. I took a risk and I gambled and I hit right. I ended up meeting this guy who ran a painting company out in Denver, Colorado. And he allowed me to kind of take over all of his digital marketing, and I helped his business become really successful in that space. And then he saw an opportunity because he already had an existing network with a lot of other contractors and, for example, interior designers. Like he had a large professional network himself, that he saw an opportunity to utilize me and start a marketing agency together. And so we did that. So I helped him, and we worked with a lot of painting contractors all across the nation, or across the globe, I should say. And just with like the timing of events that happened during COVID, it just kind of allowed myself to start my own business, which has always been my goal. I always knew that I would be in business for myself one day. That's always been in the game plan. And I always told that other boss, that old boss that I had, like, hey, you're going to be the last boss I ever have. Like, after you, I'll have a business. I never knew what it'd be. It's really funny to me that I have a marketing agency nowadays. But yeah, that's kind of how that all started. And at the time, I was just giving out a lot of free advice to tattoo artists because I was just getting a lot of tattoos myself. And that's kind of what led me into my other industry, niched with tattoo artists, or the tattoo industry, I should say. And that's kind of how DOSM started. Was I left the painting industry to go start working with tattooers. And then funny enough, again, it kind of goes back to what I said, is there's some people get lucky. Is like one of the best things that ever happened for my business was I was able to purchase my old marketing agency. I was able to go back into the painting industry and start working with painting contractors again. And that's kind of how DOSM came to be. And yeah, and that's why I say it's like a lot of the things that really propelled my business are all just like the right time, right place kind of situations. Like, yeah, I had to do things, I had to develop a skill set, but yeah, luck is a huge factor in a lot of this.
You felt like while you've been in this journey as a business owner, and you've been growing your agency and you have your niche, and you've seen a lot of success and enough success to be in the position you're in right now. As you've done that, have you felt this, that you've made any of the mistakes that we're going to talk about today, in terms of, maybe you should have measured twice before you made a move? Can you give an example of maybe something that you've seen
Yeah,
in your
for
own
sure,
business?
for sure. I talk about it as like the marketer's paradox, where it's super easy for me to get clients for my clients, but then trying to get clients for myself ends up being like a painstaking task. So I have very much been in this position, and I feel like I have an unfair advantage because like I'm able to make what I think are the right choices, but still those right choices can be wrong. And it's all about like the secret to marketing is data analyzation. Like I don't know what anyone wants to tell you, but like that's what I'm going to tell you right there, is like any success to marketing, truthfully how I feel like it is like you can make inferred decisions. Like I can infer that Google Ads is probably going to be really successful for me because I have a really strong skill set in Google Ads. Like I know how to make them work. But until I actually throw things at the wall and see what sticks, I don't know. Like the first thing I ever did was Google Ads, and I wasted $1,000 in them. The next thing I did was podcast advertising, and that was the best marketing move I ever made for my business. So again, it comes down to data interpretation. Sometimes you don't know. All we can do is try and make the best decisions moving forward. And unless we have data to kind of assess those decisions, yeah, you're really just kind of like moving through darkness in some extent.
One
And
thing you
that's
said
the
that I'm
yeah,
sorry.
yeah. And that's one of the craziest things that I've learned as a marketer is like you can be the same exact business in the same exact market with almost the same exact like pretty much the same exact thing. But what works for one business might not work for another. And that's the craziest thing I've learned as a marketer is like you can have almost apples to literal apples, and what works for one doesn't work for the other, and vice versa.
One thing you said, which is probably truer than that, right? Where it's like probably very similar between businesses is businesses like yours and ours and some people that I work with who actually brought up something very similar where you're in the business to business realm. So your job is to consult with and improve the business of somebody else. And you do that for so many different businesses that then you look at back at your own business and you're like, oh, fuck,
Yeah.
I'm making some of these same mistakes. And it's really hard when you're so focused on helping other people sometimes to clean up your own house. And I know I was just talking to a potential client about it yesterday. Very similar. He's working with other businesses. And he's like, all this stuff that we talk about with all these other guys, we have to be doing this stuff. We have to
You
be
have to
doing this
practice
stuff
what you
ourselves.
preach for sure.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing I've come to realizations. One of the biggest things this year is like I shut down most of the pages on my website because I built these all 5 years ago. I realized these are not a good reflection. Like if I look at my website in the way I would look at a client's website, I'd rip it to shreds. So I've like shut down most of my website and just focus on the homepage for that reason, knowing that I'm probably going to rebuild it. But and the other thing too is like,
I did something similar with I shut down my business's Instagram account. And I was like,
yeah,
this is a
it's
graveyard
doing a
of bad
disservice.
ideas. And I don't want to tell people that I can help them with Instagram marketing if my Instagram account is terrible.
Yeah, and like something we didn't touch on yet is one of the huge things about my business that I do is it's not just marketing, it's also, for example, systems and automations. And that's one of my biggest things too, is like I have always been operating on free plans for like the last 4 years since this business has been started. But this past Cyber Monday, I purchased a ton of software to really dive in on systems and automations for my business moving forward, just because you have to practice what you preach. And that's really what I'm trying to do now is really just get all my bases covered and how I
All right. Well,
operate.
we have a couple of other blunt force facts in there, kind of like what don't throw stones if you live in a glass house, that kind of thing. But
Yep.
let's dial back into what we're talking about today. So we're talking about
Yeah.
actually doing the work correctly in the first place. We've just been talking about all the stuff that we've done wrong and the stuff that our clients have done wrong. But let's start from the basics then. Let's instead of working backwards, let's say, okay, we have a
Moving
business that's
forward,
either a
what
brand
is
new business or we're stuck. So let's walk through your process that you've developed here that
first things
we
first?
can start moving.
Yeah. One of the first things we're going to do moving forward is go take a look at keyword research. We're going to go to Google Keyword Planner. We're going to identify what are the relevant terminologies for our business and our services. Because one of the biggest mistakes I see people make is that there's a different way people search their service on the web than they anticipate. And I can use a prime example with tattoo artists or painting contractors. You might want your place to be called a tattoo studio, and that's what might be what you call it. But really, everyone goes on Google and searches tattoo shop. Or in a different part of the country, it might not be tattoo shop. It might be tattoo parlor. And the same thing is for painting kitchen cabinets. In the northern region of America, people say or search painting kitchen cabinets. The further like south you go, people start to say refinishing kitchen cupboards. It's the same thing, but different. And that's why I'm so adamant about doing keyword research. And the other end of the stick of keyword research too is how much viability is there? Because one of the biggest mistakes I see businesses make is they go to target something on the internet and then we go do the audit and realize, oh, there's only 20 people a month searching for any possible variation of your service on Google. Not to say that your service is like pointless or not a good business opportunity, but maybe Google isn't the place for us to be focusing our efforts and attention on. Maybe a traditional route makes more sense for you and your operations. And that's why I think keyword research is like the most detrimental starting point to do any kind of like planning moving forward.
There are definitely areas where I can relate to that. I mean, like you talk to businesses who just you're so in the business, you don't think about how other people would search for you, which I think is the parlor is a good example. Or in the other, I work with a couple of bigger businesses that have a lot of services, and I'm sure like painting contractors or other types of contractors are probably similar, where it's like they offer like a ton of stuff, but in terms of the volume that a lot of people search for, you might be only talking about one or two services. So those things can kind of serve as you do, as you would say, we start off with our
Exactly.
keyword. We start off with our keyword research, and we figure out where the volume is. So in other words, the things that actually people out there are actually looking for, and enough volume where if we get them to come to us, we might be able to do some business. Then we find that and we use that kind of, I use it as like a gateway drug, right? And it's like, okay, well, like my esthetician that I work with, she does every possible, skincare treatment you could possibly think of, all the way
Yep.
down to the weight loss stuff, which actually has a lot of SEO, but some of the more esoteric stuff that you might not get to if you're just kind of starting off in your skincare journey. Like, I want Botox because Botox is what a lot of people start off with. Well, let's make sure we get enough of that percentage so that once they come in the door, we can introduce them to everything else we do. Or as you would say, if our core service is not something that people search for, maybe we need to figure out some other avenue for marketing that particular thing.
Yeah, really kind of figure out like, and that's one of the things to really effectively determine a marketing strategy right there is that keyword research will tell you, okay, is my focus on digital? Is it on social? Is it on traditional? It just, yeah, because so many people make the mistake. The most common reason people come to talk to me is about doing SEO services. And the most common thing I tell them in response is there's not enough people in your market to justify this. It just really does not make sense for the cost and the time taken to do something. And yeah. So once we've done that keyword research, the next step is for most businesses I work with, it's taking a look at their initial performance of everything. So hoping that they have Google Analytics installed on their website to see what is the performance of their website. What's the engagement rate? What's the conversion rate? Where's the traffic coming from? Because again, like what most business owners don't know, or what most marketing agencies trick most business owners on in their reports and stuff like that, is they'll say, look at all the traffic we're bringing to your website, or look at all the traffic visiting your website. But then when we take a look under the hood and filter the traffic from the actual service area that you target, it's like 10% of all website traffic is actually relevant traffic. And that's insane. So it's like really making sure what kind of traffic is visiting the website, and is that traffic relevant? And then what is that relevant traffic doing is like the next step in this process of determining, hey, how is everything performing? Because we might find, okay, there is a huge bounce rate when people visit this page on our website compared to visiting this page. Or we might find that there's a huge bounce rate on mobile. And then we'll go take a look at the website on mobile and realize, oh, there's a lot of bugs and errors with the website on mobile. And the data supports this theory that the mobile version might not be ideal.
You want to
And
define quickly what bounce rate is?
yeah, for sure. Hang on one second. My computer is calling me right now. Let me just decline this.
While
But yeah,
Tyler's
so bounce rate.
calling him, we'll wait.
Yeah, sorry. It was just while that was happening, I could not think at the same time. Bounce rate is when someone visits your website and pretty much immediately leaves. And yeah, that's ideally you don't want that happening. And that's the thing again, too. What most business owners fail to recognize, and essentially my job is to help them understand in these initial reports and things like that, is most traffic doesn't interact with your website like you think it does. Most business owners have this misconception of person comes to their website, they start reading, they start clicking around, they're reading more, they're clicking around more, they're reading more, and then they visit and hit contact and get in touch. That is so far from the truth. What most website traffic does is they come to the site, they do one quick scroll through, and then they leave. Or if they do decide to stick around, it's one quick scroll through, maybe a hover over something for a couple seconds. And then if you're lucky, they'll read something and then they contact you. It is most websites are seeing visitors spend less than a minute on the site. And like, yeah, that's again, it's just making sure a business owner understands the reality of the situation. Again, is I think one of the most challenging things because we have these misconceptions of like what's happening.
I think part of it is, especially if you're a conscientious business owner and you do a good job in general. I think that a lot of us, look, as myself as a business owner, sometimes we forget that we're just a small part of everyone else's life. Like we just kind of forget that, like maybe they're looking to paint their kitchen cabinets, but like how important is painting the kitchen cabinet in my life right now? It could be really important if I'm selling my home, and it's one of the things I got to check off on my list. But it could be just like one of those things that's like a want, and I really want to do it, and I'm just going to do some research. I'm going to get to it, and I get to it. But you know what? Like I got to go pick up my kid because they just call. I was in the middle of searching for kitchen cabinet painters, and I got to freaking go pick up my kid,
Yep.
and or I don't know if I have the money right now to do it, or, or even worse, like I wasn't even really interested, and maybe I'm looking at doing it myself, and I'm just kind of looking for ideas, right? So the fact
For
that I got to your
information.
website doesn't mean that I'm even a prospective customer.
Yeah, and that takes it back even back in the keyword research stage. Half of what I do in my reports and talking to clients is showing them, hey, here's your keyword data. And almost all this keyword data doesn't matter to you because your website isn't designed to target people in their information gathering stage, is what I like to call it. Most websites and most businesses are set up in a way where the only thing that matters to them is people in that buying intent stage. They have money in their hand, they are ready for a service. And I can express that with keywords where someone searches painters near me, that means they have buying intent. Whereas they say, what is the cost of painting my house? That is a information gathering search. Both can be relevant. Some websites can target both, but most businesses, they can only target the searches that have buying intent to really take advantage of it.
Right. So we're talking a lot about, so we've walked through some basic steps. We started off with doing some good keyword research to determine, okay, what do people actually search for that's relevant to what we're selling? Which ones have some volume that we could potentially build on? And that's going to inform our overall marketing strategy. Then we're going to look at actually how we're performing for that,
Yep.
or just we're performing in general, like for not just for those keywords, but also like who's actually visiting our site, how they're getting there. So we have Google Analytics on there. So we're going to have to make sure that's on there. So
Yep.
once we kind of get a better sense, we've done kind of a basic audit now. So we have a good idea of kind of the keywords that are important to our business in terms of the actual ones and the volume. And we've got a good idea of how we're doing. What's kind of the next step in your mind?
The next step is then determining what is the appropriate strategy. And you kind of can do that by also just kind of examining what is already working existingly. Hopefully you've tried Google ads in the past. Hopefully you've tried social media ads in the past. Hopefully you have a social media going, a Google My Business, email campaigns, things like that. I mean, they're all givens. You should be doing all of these things. So
Well,
like
I think for
hopefully you've
most of
done
our
them.
business have kind of dipped their toe into everything. They just might not be
Exactly.
running it right now.
So then it's taking a look at each one of these things. And this is where the systems comes into play. Like this is why my business is called digitally optimized systems to marketing, is because most people I've worked with, I've realized it does you no good if I do a great job marketing, if everything falls through the cracks once it comes in through the door. So this is where like a good CRM is detrimental, and having a strong drip campaign to warm leads up over time is like, we take a second to kind of take that into consideration. Is the user experience, once they get in touch with us or once we have their information, decent enough for certain strategies moving forward? Or can we look at our CRM's data to know? Because again, there's a difference between the bird's eye view Google Analytics data and the real world customer data in a CRM. I might see my clients are getting a phenomenal conversion rate for Google ads, but then they could all be bogus leads. It could be the worst leads they've ever gotten. Like, I don't know that as the marketer. And that's where something like a CRM plays into the conversation, because then you can say, oh, we've gotten all of these Google leads. These Google leads have a 40% conversion rate to becoming a customer, or a 60% conversion rate to becoming a customer. And that then also helps us decide, okay, what are the channels we should prioritize moving forward? If we find that most of the data supports that, okay, maybe Google Ads or SEO makes the most sense because there is good keyword viability. Our website is a strong converting website. Like, we do have the resources appropriate for this place. Well, then it becomes like, okay, what's the strategy moving forward for Google Ads and SEO? If we don't have those foundational pieces, then it's maybe a conversation of social media. Like, what if we have strong social media content? Like a painting contractor, like I tell them, let's be pragmatic about the situation. How many plumbers do you follow? How many electricians do you follow? Yeah, that's right. You don't follow contractors on social media because that's boring ass content. As versus like a tattoo artist, that's all the name of the game is sharing your content with the world. So being mindful of the client that I'm working with, and then deciding, okay, is social media the appropriate strategy? Or if none of the data that we've gotten supports anything digital, we have a piss poor converting website, then maybe it's embracing traditional marketing. Like, postcards still work, flyers still work, door knocking still works, hanging signs up in neighborhoods still works. Like, these traditional tactics still work, especially for people that don't have a strong digital presence. Like, you kind of have to embrace them. So yeah, that's kind of like the next steps moving forward, is taking a look at all of our options and then kind of deciding what's the lowest hanging fruit, is how I describe it. We don't need to climb to the top of the tree. We can just grab what's closest to us.
think there's a big kind of jumping off point or like gap building point kind of within what you talked about is that I find um, even when we talk to people on our entrepreneurial calls, is that a lot of people who do business, a volume of business, even if it's great enough, and that's kind of what we talked about before, is the catch-22 is the business is doing well enough to pay you as a contractor. So business is happening, right? A lot of people don't have a good sense of where that mix of business is, right? They're just like, well, how do you, like this is a conversation you've probably had, right? So it's like, how did you hear? How do your customers get to you? Oh, they come to the website. What does that mean? I mean, or how did
Yeah.
how do people hear about you? Word of mouth. Well, what does that mean? Because getting through the website could be through any of these advertising tactics you're talking about. It could be through SEO. It could be from social media. I mean, like all those things could result in somebody going to your website and sending a contact page or submitting a quote request or however you've designed the website to handle someone new coming or buying the product, right? Word of mouth could be social media because
Yep.
social media is a big part of 2024, 2025. Word of mouth is
Yeah.
just kind of knowing about you and then having, friends and family and people who've done business with you or think of you highly, be able to share that with other people.
That's where it starts to get really frustrating in marketing, where you really start digging through the weeds. Because going back to that example of like tracking your sources, someone might tell you, oh, I found you through a Google search. But really what they mean is I did a Google search and then I found you on Yelp and then I got your contact information off Yelp. So really that's a Yelp lead, not a Google search lead. But to them, it was a Google search. And then Google can also mean a variety of things. If they say Google search, it could be the map, it could be ads, it could be local service ads, it could be organic. Yeah, that's where my services come into play, is because you are essentially getting out of business and now you're trying to determine, hey, where's the next step? But it's unfortunate because I would love to work with people at the start of their kind of like marketing journey, get them early on. But more often than not, my target client is someone who's already made these mistakes. They're someone who's taken this leap of faith with another agency and then got him bogus services. And that's just the unfortunate situation around it, is
Like
that,
a lot of companies now, or they might just work with an SEO agency, right? Or they might work with
yep,
just somebody who's going to work on their Facebook. And so therefore, because they're all over the place, it's not really well connected. And there aren't enough, especially at the level, like if you pay like a cheap SEO agency, for example, or even a cheap social media agency. Generally, like that will fit the small to medium sized business, or a Google Ads agency, like any of these, right? Where it's
yeah,
budget
$500 a
minded for a
month.
small business. Exactly. What that company's probably not doing enough of is digging into your CRM, because that is where it's important for the business owner to be able to just like at a snapshot have an idea of, and as you said, right, we're not going to be able to trust people completely, but just
Yep,
at least having a sense of
an
where this
ideal.
business is coming from. Just having a good idea, be able to say, okay, well, I know that we had X number of leads from Facebook, and I know from my CRM that we had X number of leads from Google, but that requires a little bit of work. Like that, you have to do the work on the CRM to really set it
Exactly.
up.
I've let clients go because they won't have conversations with me about how their performance is on their end. Like that's just the the reality of the situation. It takes a lot of just kind of digging through the data and understanding how everything is performing, and like really getting it's nuanced. It's a holistic approach to really get good performance. It's not just focusing on one aspect of something. It's really taking a look of how does it all play into a whole.
When you make now that we've done all this work, so we've really done it. And I think that's a big part of it. I mean, that probably requires a whole separate conversation, is kind of how you set up your back end. Oh, and the other thing you'd mentioned as well is like, what's the follow up, which is a whole nother conversation, because once a
Yep.
lead comes in the door, it's like, especially as, I mean,
If
you
you're
and
a good
I, or
business,
you,
you have two different types of leads. You have the buy now leads, and then you have we'll save these leads for later leads. If that's how a
right.
really good, efficient business is operating.
Unfortunately, you just, a lot of times if you're on our side, or if you're like, I'm even thinking of other examples where if you're like in charge of business development, you're like, okay, my job is to bring in leads, right? Warm leads who I've spoken to, and now it's the business's job to deliver a great product or service. And as part of the business owner's job is to figure out, what we might say the funnel, like which part of the funnel is not working. Are we not getting the right leads in, or are we not doing what we need to do with the lead
That's why I say is I do. That's why I find that's why my services aren't just marketing, and why I make my clients really approach everything holistically. Is more often than not, I find that marketing isn't the problem. Usually, there's something else down the line that tends to be the problem. It's you. When I first got started, I would do these things where I would test the response time of clients. I would call them on odd hours, like Friday at 9:30 p.m. and leave my contact information. It's crazy the average response time. Like you would think it'd be like Monday, Tuesday. I wouldn't get responses for a couple of weeks. And it's like, you cannot say shit if you're hiring me as a marketer and you're not responding for 2 weeks to your leads. That's not the marketer's fault. That's the business's fault. And that's the
Well,
thing
it's also if
that,
you're going to be throwing a lot of money at, if you're going to advertise
yeah,
on TV, let's say you're going to advertise on late night TV because it's cheap and you advertise a phone number, you have to
yep,
expect people are going to call.
exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you don't
Well,
get
and that's the
back
thing is
end,
the
as you
website's
said, that's part of it.
24/7.
This part of this is doing your back end so that you're prepared for if you're going to invest in money and it's going to work at lead gen, then you
Yep.
have to have that other part already set up. So you're not just throwing the money away on leads that, because as you said, if you don't get, there was definitely, I have to find it, but it's great research. Harvard Business School released this a couple of years ago. But it's just like, if you just look at the chart in terms of like response time and how often that lead becomes a part of your business portfolio,
Yeah.
like it's moments, it's seconds. Like, so it's as soon as minutes pass, hours, days, and then it's gone. That
Yep.
person may never, it's like if you don't respond to them right away, it's not just like gradual where it's like we might lose a couple of people. You lose everybody if you don't
Yeah.
respond right away. And then obviously it's industry dependent because some industries, like right now, if we try and get a hold of an electrician,
Yeah. It's
that's
standard
difficult
for a
because
tattoo
electricians are
artist.
busy.
Like, or a tattoo artists are fortunate enough that the industry has just kind of made it known that you're not going to get a response.
Whenever I freaking try and get, and I'm a last minute person. So like whenever I'm just like, I'm thinking about getting a tattoo, and they're like, well, you have like, booking 4 months out right now. And I'm just
Yeah,
like, yeah.
they do not care about user experience whatsoever, but like a painting contractor cannot afford that. They have to be on the dot in response time and everything. And yeah, that's why marketing is just the start of the conversation for
Let's talk
growing a
about let's
business.
talk about choosing that mix because we did get to that, and it was kind of part of the longer
Yeah, choosing the
conversation.
mix.
But
Oh, something
once
else
we get down
too.
to the point where we have the data and we're like, okay, well, what are we where
Some
what are we going to
Can we take
focus
it a
on?
step back
Because like
though?
this, well,
Because there's
let
another
me just
core
finish.
part.
Let me just finish this point, and then you can take a step back. Like we had this conversation today, and we have this conversation a lot in our business groups. It's like most businesses are not Coca-Cola, right? So
Yep.
Coca-Cola, Budweiser, where they can afford and have to be literally everywhere based on their model. They can be on the corner of your browser. They can have a sign outside. They can fly a thing by. They can be on every advertisement, every event they're going to be at. So they can afford to do that. But most of us are either finite in our time and in our money, which I think is a big part of the marketing mix as well. Because like ideally, yes, you'd be everywhere because you can get business for almost any business is relevant in every channel. But the
Absolutely.
question is like, where are we best off? So you can either start there or go back to the point you were addressing.
They're kind of connected because the how you choose is you play to your strengths. And that's kind of what I was going at. Is like when I'm doing these reports, when I'm doing these audits, I'm mindful, do we have a strong website? Do we have a website that can convert? If we don't, then I'm thinking, what are our other strengths? And that's why at the start of all my reports, I start with what do I see as your strengths? And then from there, it's like, okay, how do we play to these strengths? If you're great at producing like visual content, because that's the name of the game nowadays, well, then social media is probably going to be what I'm going to recommend because that's the basis of social media. If you have a
Or
strong
if you're like a
blogging,
really strong personality,
yeah,
right? If
strong
you're like a really
personality, that's going
strong,
to be
like
the
if I'm good
recommendation.
in front of the camera, which I don't think I'm that great at, but like we know the people who are, and you can see them
Yeah.
online all the time. Like that person should probably lead off with
My
some.
client
They
who's
got to get
super
in front of the
reserved,
camera.
nervous, hates ever being in front of the camera, I'm not going to tell them to do social media because that's just not going to work for them. Like their strength is going to be probably blogging because they have no problem doing a blog every couple months and then optimizing it with some free tools. Like it's figuring out what are your strengths. And then the point that I wanted to get back to is unique selling propositions. Most people come to me and I ask them, what are your unique selling propositions? What are your competitive edges to your business? And they'll just tell me expectations. Like for an example of a painting contractor, they'll be like, "Oh, we show up on time, we don't leave a mess, we do a good job, we're always responsive." We guarantee our products. We use professional products and stuff like that. I'm like, none of those are USPs. Those are all expectations I would have if I was working with a professional. What do you do that's truly unique? And some examples I'll give is like free lifetime touch-ups. Like every year, I know a contractor will come back and do free yearly touch-ups for up to an hour, and that is huge because he's now going back and making sales again. He has an opportunity to reconnect with his customers. A lot of people are like, "You're crazy for doing that," but he makes most of his business by just reconnecting with his customers with a perceived unique selling proposition. And the same advice I give for choosing your marketing channels as I do for coming up and developing unique selling propositions. Play to your strengths. How do you want to be known? My whole thing with my business is that I'm anti-agency. I don't believe in management fees. I think that you should have full ownership over your digital assets. So those are my unique selling propositions. Those are how I want to be known. That's how my business, those are like my biggest beliefs and why I do this. And that's how you're able to make your marketing even more effective. Because sometimes it's like looking at everything that's going on. It's like, you're doing everything correctly. You're running a strong marketing campaign. It's set up correctly. You got a good website. You're showing images, but it's just, there's something lacking. And what unique selling propositions do is they give marketing its teeth. They just allow it to do more with less. And the other thing too is if you have a good enough unique selling proposition, you can justify any price because you're not comparing apples to apples. You're no longer competing on price. You're now competing by setting yourself different than the rest of your competition. So yeah, that's my advice moving forward is play to your strengths.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, I have a business right now that is just, we're working on SEO, working on some other channels, but um, one of the areas where they're just, and you can look again, like being data backed, I think is important because then instead of it being a feeling or like a thought, like maybe this is what we're doing
That's
well,
the
then you have
thing.
some data to back it up. Because I have a company who like primarily they're getting all their business, all their traffic from Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, okay, well, one thing we're not going to do is fuck around with Facebook. We're
Yeah, it's working.
going to
Yeah.
keep that being a channel. Now, we want to reach this younger demographic. We have a sense that maybe they're not on Facebook finding us. We have a sense that maybe our population is too old. Let's figure out how do we fix this other thing. But we are not going to fuck around with our Facebook strategy. We have to make sure that we are continuing that and iterating off of it as much as we can because that's driving everything.
Exactly. Yeah. And again, it goes back to what I was saying before is what works for one business might not work for another business. Like you really don't know until you try different things. Like you can make a good enough guess, but expect part of the process to be a learning process. Like you can make what is the perceived best choice possible. And then you might learn like, oh, that didn't work out there for me. Like what I thought was going to be like my greatest promotion ever of like, oh, introduce me to another business owner and get 50% off. It was a little bit of a flop. I learned that. I'm not going to use it moving forward next time. But at least I learned. I tried it. I gave it a shot. Like that's the real secret of marketing. It's just taking the time to look at the data, assess what's going on, and correcting your choices moving forward. It doesn't hurt to pivot.
You can easily see where referral marketing works really well, and I think it really depends on your niche. Like if you're working with tattoo, I'm just walking it through to give people a sense of like why, like because obviously we'd probably all promote that to businesses
Yeah,
we work
but
with. Like referral networks are important, but like if you think to yourself, like let's say you were working with primarily tattoo artists, or like I'll give you another example. Like I was working with these small independent plumbers. Okay, like what networking do you think these small independent plumbers are doing? Like what do you think their day looks like? They're
yeah,
basically waking up super early in the morning to go into a job, and then they're coming home super late at night, and then they're
yep,
spending their weekend on their boat. You know what I mean? There's no like networking. There's no like, hey, I know Joe other plumber. Like I'm going to help him out and give you a little bit of business. You know what I mean?
yep.
It's more like that. So like that's probably the wrong area. That speaks to your point where it's like, yes, referral marketing is fantastic, but like in your industry, might not be the best channel to develop a program around or a
Yeah.
campaign around.
Yeah. Well, no, my interpretation of why it didn't perform well is I've had the same email marketing list for essentially the last 4 years. And what I've noticed is that I've essentially been doing one promotion every year. Yeah, I've noticed it in the data. It's a diminishing return. And the only
Well,
way
like
for it to grow is just to get new audience members. And that's the
one
biggest
thing,
thing.
one thing just to kind of not quite wrap this up yet. One thing we haven't really talked about yet is competitor research. Like, where does that fit into your plan, or does it not play a big? Because you're talking about the individual businesses'
I look
strengths and
at so
weaknesses and what works for them, but like maybe just
part
talk a
of
little
the
bit about where that would fit
audit.
into your plan.
Yeah, so like part of the audit takes in the consideration of competitors. So like once I've done the keyword research, I'm going to go then do a search from an incognito window from the location that's most relevant, like whatever is our target neighborhood. I'm going to go search from there, whatever is the top 5 to 10 most relevant keywords. So whether that's tattoo shops near me, painters near me, or whatever, I'm just going to go take a look and see what are the search engine results there. And then from there, more often than not, it's probably going to be Yelp is like one of your biggest competitors. There's going to be some directory service as one of your biggest competitors. But then we're going to look and see who's showing up most consistently in the ads, who's showing up most consistently in the map, who's showing up most consistently in the organic results. And we're not going to obsess over it because I know I've seen a lot of agencies that use like a lot of plans that just like take a look and see everything that their competitors are doing. The only thing that I kind of care about is like, what is their user experience like on their website? We're going to go take a look at their website, understand where are they competing against us, and do I as a professional feel like we can compete against their user experience? Generally, I feel very confident in my abilities. I can say yes, like we can build a website better than theirs. But more once in a while, we'll come across like, oh wow, this is a very strongly competitive marketplace or area, and that just goes back into that decision making of like playing to your strengths. Like, is your website really a strength when there's 5 other strong websites in your market? Probably not. Like, we might want to figure out some other way to get in front of them, maybe through postcards. So people aren't seeing all the websites listed out in front of them when they do a Google search. Maybe we hit them with a postcard to visit our website. So that way they're not viewing other websites too. And then, yeah. So taking we're mindful of the competitors, but yeah, I really do not spend a lot of time looking at what they're doing. Because again, it goes back to that thing. What might work for another business might not work for you. So I really, really just focus on the business itself and the data I can find specific to their market.
Been talking about doing your work ahead of time. Do you have any kind of closing, wrapping up thoughts on that just idea that you've kind of outlined here? We did 4
Yes,
steps.
take
We did
2
keyword
seconds.
research. We did keyword research. We evaluated what people were searching where. We evaluated the volume to see if it was relevant. We made sure the back end was set up, our analytics were set up to get a good sense of kind of our current situation and what we're doing. And then we kind of used our strengths, our unique selling proposition, the kind of and combination of that to figure out which channels made the most sense. So why don't you kind of go ahead and talk? I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, no, there's a good wrap up there. I think the anyone listening to this, if you've gotten this far, I challenge to you all, go pretend to be a customer for your business. Just go try and search for your business as if you were looking for that service. See, do you even show up in the Google search results? Do you come across in social media? Then once you do find yourself, pretend to look at your website with a very critical customer's eye. Would you want to engage and reach out if you were a customer? And again, look at it with a very critical eye. Like, be honest with it yourself. And then, yeah, I mean, you can't test. I mean, if you have the opportunity where like if you have other people that handle like your calls and intake, test to see their response time, test to see what it's like. There's been countless times where I've worked with someone, they have like a receptionist, and like you call and their receptionist is extremely rude. And you're like, I don't want this person to be the first impression of my business. So yeah, just go take the time to pretend to be a customer of your business and see what it's like. What are your customers' experience? Go send yourself an invoice. Go send yourself an estimate. What does that estimate look like in your personal email? You might be shocked by the results.
Advice for any business owner right now who either great advice for any business owner, like you should just be doing all this stuff right now, take a step back, reevaluate everything, but especially if you've hit a plateau, or even better if you are early and get this done ahead of time instead of waiting until you've already hit that plateau and you've taken a dip. Tyler, thank you for joining us. How can people find your business and get in touch with you?
Yeah. So, I mean, the best way to get in touch with me is just to schedule a meeting. I don't really do calls or anything like that. I'm very meticulous about my calendar. And you can find that on my website, which is dos-m.com. You can find that by spelling dos-m or dos-m.com.
We'll put the link into the podcast description as well. Our blunt force fact for today: measure twice, cut once. Do your work ahead of time so you make fewer mistakes. And if you're in the middle of it, take a step back. Let's see if we can clean up the back end so that the front end comes out. the way we want it. Thank you so much, Tyler, for joining us.
Thanks
I'm
again.
Patrick Marino. We will see you next time.